Hi, and welcome to the Rio Knitting Podcast, but this time around,
so this is
it's a book
Rhiannon from the
review.
future.
So I won't really be talking
Rhiannon.
about knitting today.
I kept
if
having
you
technical difficulties
are here just
while I
for
was
the book
recording
review,
this, so I
and you
apologize
don't know,
that it
I'm a
is
knitter.
ending
I've been
with
doing videos about
me
knitting for a while
actually
now,
just showing you a photo
and I often
of
talk
the
about
house
books that I'm reading
in
those
2018
videos.
when I visited.
And
I
this
wanted
year,
to say,
I thought I wanted to try
get
to
a
do
chance
some
to visit
more
New
in-depth
Orleans,
book reviews. I
definitely
have
go to the
recorded
Garden
a couple
District.
other videos in the past where
she
I talked
owned a
about
bunch of
my
different
favorite
homes.
authors,
That's where a lot of
my
her
favorite books of
characters
theirs,
live.
and I had so much fun doing that, and
very
it's
much
something
a
I've always
part
wanted to
of
come
the
back
books,
to.
and
But I didn't really have the time.
There's just so much
know exactly
cool history
like,
there. Like New Orleans is such a great.
I didn't really
city
have.
To visit.
I don't normally have like a strong
the architecture
TBR.
Is stunning.
I always have a
appreciate
TBR.
you
I have
sticking
like
around,
50 books that I've purchased and not read yet. But I
never
never know what I'm going to read next. But
Please,
this year,
comment and let me know what you think.
I've been
and
super obsessed again with the Vampire Chronicles because there's a TV show from AMC,
shorter,
and the first 2 seasons are out. They're on Netflix now, and they've also created other shows that are sort of
Gideon
in the
the Ninth,
same
which will be my
universe
next book review.
of Anne Rice's Mayfair Witches and Talamasca. So I'm watching those shows. And I thought, you know what? I haven't read these books in over a decade, really. I think the last one I read would have been more than 10 years ago. So, but I've always been a Vampire Chronicles fan. I mean, for like more than 20 years. So I thought, I'm going to reread all these books and I'm going to read them in order because I've never done that before. I don't think I've done that. No, I haven't read them all, and I haven't read them all in order. I should just say, I have 7 pages of notes, okay? I took a lot of notes, and that's because I decided that my process would be to read through the book once and just sort of enjoy the narrative, and then to go back and take careful notes and pull out the things that I want to talk about. So I think I'm going to just stick with that process, which means that next up I'll be reviewing Gideon the Ninth and the Vampire Lestat after that. So I'm about to start my initial read through of the Vampire Lestat, and I'm about to do my close read of Gideon the Ninth. So you can probably expect that the next video book review will be Gideon the Ninth, and then after that the Vampire Lestat. So it could be a while if you're just interested in Vampire Chronicles, but it'll be worth it, I promise. So Interview with the Vampire. This book was published in 1976, and it was Anne Rice's debut novel. She had not published a novel before that, which I thought was kind of incredible. Like, what an amazing thing to write. She had written like a short story that she then adapted, but you know, kind of the big catalyst for her writing this book was that her daughter died at the age of 5. So this book has a lot of themes about grief and loss of a child. And the other major theme is of otherness and learning how to live with yourself when you feel like you're at odds with the world. Queerness is a big part of that. I will say a lot of people, myself included, are drawn to the Vampire Chronicles because it is such an exploration of that outsider experience, and all the characters are queer. This book was immediately popular, and Anne continued writing Vampire Chronicles novels until 2016 when the last one was published. She passed away in, I think, 2022, and so she is an executive producer and is credited as an executive producer on all of the AMC shows, but unfortunately she didn't live to see the end results of that work, which is pretty devastating to me. I think it's pretty devastating. I think she would have freaking loved it. Like, she would have loved, especially Lestat, which is like the hero of the whole series. Like, she would have loved it. All right, so let's see. What else? I feel like I need to say that despite being the villain in this book, Armand is my favorite character. I don't know if that's because the first book in the series that I personally read was The Vampire Armand, or if that's just because I relate to the character so much. It's probably both. But Armand is a character that is really great, and I don't think he's as villainous as everybody says. Like, I think everybody's villainous, and he's just kind of one of that group. I also feel like I need to say, when I first read this book, I didn't really love it. It was never one of my favorites. My favorite books in the series, my favorite book is probably Queen of the Damned. Maybe the Vampire Armand is like a close second, but also maybe tied with the Vampire Lestat, because that is a really good book. And I think I didn't really enjoy Louis as a character until I saw the TV show, and then suddenly something like clicked in my head that, like, okay, I understand this person. It could also be that I've grown up a little and I understand a little bit more about grief than I did when I first read it. I think that's probably part of it, because the second time around reading it, or third or fourth, or who knows, like, I don't know how many times I've read this book, but I know that I haven't read it in over 10 years. So I just know that it really hit different this time. And it hit different not only because I liked Louis and I sympathized with him and I felt like the story was better than I remembered. It also was like a lot funnier than I remembered, and there's stuff that I've learned about the world and about New Orleans since then that I think really enriched my appreciation of the book. So I'm going to share all that at the end. I'll start with a plot summary. But one thing I want to get out of the way is that there are some people out there who will tell you that they don't remember Louis and Lestat being a couple, or they don't think this book was really gay. I'm here to tell you, it is really, 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 really gay. Like, this is the gayest thing I've ever read, maybe. I mean, it's just really, really gay. And I think there's a reason that so much of the fan are queer people like myself, and that it really resonates with queer people. And even, I've seen in interviews with the showrunner of the AMC series talking about, like, this is the audience that we were writing for, because we know who the fan base is. Like, if LGBTQ people are not on board with our adaptation, we've done something very wrong. So yeah, I am going to list all the things that struck me as uber gay in this book. And I hope that just like squashes all the rumors out there that there's something somehow that this book is like too pure for that, because frankly it's not. And I think it's insulting to Anne Rice's memory to try to erase the queerness of this book. Okay, so the basic structure of this novel, I want to talk about that. So it's told in 4 parts. 1 and 3 are like really long sections, and then 2 and 4 are these little kind of interludes. What's interesting then is that it's like the whole thing is kind of wrapped up in this frame of the main character Louis telling his story to a reporter who is unnamed but who will be named in a later book. So I might refer to him as Daniel Malloy. He's a young reporter that Louis meets and decides to do an interview with. All of this is taking place in San Francisco in 1973. And something that stood out to me right away is that sections 1 and 3, the long parts of Louis' story, are really about his relationships with his 2 lovers, Lestat and Armand. So kind of all the other stuff that happens in his life gets squished into these like little, really like interludes, right? Like it's like even the way he's telling his story is like the relationships that I've been in are the important moments of my life. And the other stuff I did, well, it's just whatever. So that I just found that intriguing, and I hadn't really thought about that before. Okay, so I'm gonna go through, so the next part of this video, I'm just gonna be summarizing kind of what happens in all 4 parts of the book. And then I'll dive into some more like granular level stuff, okay? All right, plot summary. Okay, so part 1, like I said, a vampire and a journalist walk into a bar. They decide to go to a nearby apartment and maybe do some drugs, and the guy's gonna record Louis' story, and he's sort of skeptical, like, are you really a vampire? But then pretty soon he's like, oh no, yeah, this guy's like really a vampire. This is weird. And the charming thing that you'll learn about this reporter is that he don't give a shit. He's like, I'm in incredible danger, but like, sounds cool. Like, who else is out here interviewing a vampire? And, you know, respect, right? Okay, so Louis is telling his story. His full name is Louis Dupont de Lac. He was a plantation owner in Louisiana in the 1790s near New Orleans. He was born in France, but he was raised in the US, and he's responsible for his family's well-being. So you get the sense that maybe his family used to have more wealth and now they have less, and he's trying to hold it all together, and they don't really appreciate how hard he works. Or so he thinks. But I want to say he probably doesn't appreciate how hard the people he's enslaved are working, right? So he has this brother that he loves, but who's like kind of a religious fanatic. And his brother is like, I want you to sell everything and fund me traveling overseas and doing a big revival because Europe isn't Christian enough. And Louis is like, no. And his brother's like, okay, fine, I'm gonna kill myself. So his brother walks off of a roof, and then Louis is in a deep depression. That's kind of how the book opens, or how his story opens. He's in a deep depression. He's wandering through town, getting drunk, being miserable, and in swoops this guy, Lestat, who is a vampire. And Lestat has this old father who's blind and dying, and he's like, you're gonna become a vampire. I'm gonna move into your house, and we're gonna take care of my dad together. And Louis like, sure. So Louis kind of pretends that he hates Lestat, and the way he describes him, it's like he was awful with money, he was careless, he was foolish, he was dumb, I hated him. But he also says that he's like dazzled, and he doesn't put up any kind of resistance to like becoming a vampire and then living with him. So they live together for like several decades. In that time, Lestat's father dies, and Louis makes him reconcile with him and tell him he forgives him, which is like, I don't know, not something you would do for just like a squatter, I guess. But yeah, so Louis also gets obsessed with the neighbor lady who he refers to as Babette or Babette. I don't know. I'm going to say Babette. That makes more sense to me. He insists it's not romantic. He's like, I don't like her in a romantic way, okay? But it starts when Lestat is like hunting his brother Frenier, and Babette's brother Frenier, who's only referred to by his last name. And it's really obvious that Louis sees Frenier, and to an extent Babette, as like the people that he could be if he was still alive. So he talks about how, you know, basically Frenier is like everything that he wasn't, right? Like he's smarter at business, he's better than me. And he thinks that Lestat is hunting him and hunting young men in general because Lestat has this sort of unacknowledged desire to avenge himself against his own like being turned into a vampire. So like his own loss of potential is haunting him, right? Because he was in his 20s, he was sort of on the precipice of having a bright future, you know, just like a bright young man. And then he was turned into a vampire, so now he's taking it out by like hunting other bright young men. So this is like a point of contention with them. And then after Lestat kills Frenier, Louis sees his sister Babette as like a kindred spirit because he knows that their plantations are not you know, in great shape or something. And so he's like, if she steps in, I can give her financial advice. She can take care of her family instead of just like waiting for a man to save her. So I think he sees her as a kindred spirit, as someone who's also kind of going against the grain of society. And his obsession with her is kind of it's kind of like his own inability to accept sort of like who he is. So he periodically shows up at night to give her advice. She thinks he's like a guardian angel. And eventually he's going to reveal himself to her, and she's going to realize, like, oh, he's not who I thought he was. So this happens when there's a slave revolt, because, by the way, he and Lestat are still living on the plantation that his family owned, and the slaves are not fools, so they figure out that these guys are vampires, and they're like, we're gonna have to rebel and kill them. And basically Louis and Lestat murder everybody, burn the house down, escape. Babette helps them, but then she like flips out because she's like, oh, actually you're a demon, you are what they said you were. And she ends up going insane. Louis, all this time, he's trying so hard not to eat humans, but eventually he gets so hungry that he decides to attack a small child who is just like sitting in her house with her dead mother crying, and he drains her, and then later Lestat takes her and turns her into a vampire to like baby trap him because he thinks Louis is gonna leave him. After many decades of the three of them living together, and I'm really summarizing because that's not the most exciting portion of the story, they're like just an unhappy family for like 70 years or something, 60 something years. And so Louis and Claudia plot their escape from Lestat because they think he's controlling, and they think that, you know, he's not telling them everything they want to know about the world of vampires. That, you know, he's acting as if the only one that matters is like the three of us, and they're like, well, what about other vampires? There's other people like us, right? Claudia is like distinctly awful in this story. She's so sympathetic in the TV show, I can't even like compare, but in the book she's just kind of this like monster child. So anyway, they murder Lestat, and then he kind of comes back, and then they murder him again, and Louis burns that house down too. So now it's on to part two. Part two is just Louis and Claudia traveling through Europe to find the OG vampires. So they're going to Romania and Hungary and stuff, thinking like, okay, this is where vampires come from. But what they find is that the vampires there are more like zombies, like they're kind of mindless, and they drink blood, but they're stupid and they don't communicate normally. And the villagers there know how to handle some vampires. So they realize it's not safe for them, and there's really nothing to see, and they flee to Paris. So that was all of part two. I'm telling you, that section of the story, not so significant in Louis' life or in his retelling. Part three, and I apologize, I'm reading my notes a lot because there's a lot to get through. But Louis and Claudia arrive in Paris. Really early on, they meet a coven of vampires who run a theater that is literally called Théâtre du Vampire, or Vampire Theater. I mean, so dumb, right? And they realize that Lestat was actually like the founder of this theater, but they're not really sure like what that means, just that maybe they shouldn't tell people that they killed him or that he's their maker. By the time they figure that out though, Louis like already totally digmatized by Armand, who's the leader of this like coven of theater kids. So some of the funniest scenes are in this section because Louis meets Armand, and basically his eyes like pop out of his head, and he's like fantasizing about shacking up with him and just like, oh, this is gonna be so great. And meanwhile Armand is like straight up sedating Claudia and like telling her, like whispering it and like telepathically, you should just kill yourself and leave because I want Louis for myself. I mean, it's like very bizarre. And then there's this other vampire named Santiago who's just like, I don't know, he's just really aggressive. He doesn't like Louis. He's being weird. And so he's like being like just a total pest, but like in a super entertaining way. Like just top tier hater, you know? And then this section of the book also has like some of the saddest portions, of course, because Claudia is like very aware that Louis would have probably never killed Lestat if she hadn't made him. Like he would have just stayed with him, right? Because as much as he complains about him, he just couldn't quit him, you know? Like in a very Brokeback Mountain kind of way. I can't quit you. And now he's met this Armand guy that he's also just like immediately in love with, doesn't care about her. And so she's thinking about how she's going to get away and have her own life. So she meets this doll maker named Madeline, who had lost a child, and to like process her grief was creating all these dolls that looked like her daughter. And they become close friends. I don't know if friends is the right word. They have kind of a weird relationship where it's clear that like Claudia is going to become like her daughter, right? Like her replacement daughter, which is odd because Claudia has struggled so much with not wanting to be seen as a child forever. I mean, the woman is like 70 and she's in a 5-year-old's body forever. So she has a real problem with how people perceive her as a child, despite her being not at all a child, and she hasn't been a child for a long time. So she and Madeline are going to be companions. Louis turns Madeline into a vampire so that they can be together. And they're just about to part ways when the coven kidnaps everybody and decides to put them on trial for the murder of Lestat, who, surprise, surprise, isn't dead. So you may be wondering, how do you try someone for the murder of someone who wasn't murdered? Hypocrisy, that's how you do it. They get tried for murder and sentenced, and so Louis' sentence is that they put him in this coffin and they put him in their morgue under the theater, where he's just gonna like slowly starve to death. And then Claudia is burned up by the sun. Madeline with her. Armand lets Louis out, so Louis escapes. So Louis is really heartbroken, and he's mad at Armand, who doesn't really take responsibility for what happened. Louis thinks that Armand could have stopped everybody, and Armand is like, well, I couldn't have. And what Louis says in this section is really significant. He's like, I understand now that I've been passive and I haven't taken charge or taken responsibility for my own life. And that's kind of what I hate about you, is that you're exactly like me. So they kind of part ways. And Louis says before they go, by the way, don't go back to the theater. So he's planning on killing everybody and burning it down, because Louis loves to burn buildings down. That's like his number one favorite thing to do. That's how he solves his problems, is burn it down. Armand, for his part, is like, I don't want to have to rule my coven with an iron fist, and stopping them from killing Claudia would have been basically sentencing me to have to be that kind of leader, which I don't want to do. So maybe what isn't clear is that Armand has had to be that kind of leader before, and that gets explained better in other books, but it's, it's complicated. But what he does do is he goes to the theater and he lets all of the human staff go, because he knows that Louis is planning on burning down the theater. Louis solves most of his problems by burning a building, and you got to respect the consistency. So a few days later, after Louis, basically killed everyone that he's mad at, he and Armand reunite, and this time Louis like, well, I love you, so what are we going to do about that? And we should go to the Louvre, right? Like, we should just go look at some art together. And they decide that they're going to be companions and they're going to travel the world together. So that's the end of part 3. So that was kind of a lot of stuff happened, right? And now part 4, again, this is pretty short, but like, there's a lot of stuff that happens in here. Anyway, I don't know. So part 4 opens with the present day, which is, the 1970s. Louis in this apartment with this reporter who he refers to as the boy. And he's like, okay, well, that's it. That's the rest of my story. And then he's like, except for, here's the rest. Here's what happened since then. So it's very weird, because he's like, that's it. That was my whole story. But he's like, I bet you're wondering where Armand is. What happened there? And basically Louis and Armand like travel the world, but because of all that he's been through, Louis is like traumatized, and so he's withdrawn and he's pretty shitty to Armand. Armand is like still kind of keeping some secrets, and so the relationship is pretty much doomed. They live in New York for a while, and then Armand says, like, let's go to New Orleans. And Louis like, I don't know if I want to go back to New Orleans, but he's like, what if I told you Lestat was alive? And suddenly Louis wants to go to New Orleans. It's funny like that. So they go to New Orleans, and then while they're there, Louis, unbeknownst to Armand, goes to see Lestat. And he doesn't tell him that he's going to see Lestat, and he doesn't tell him that he went and saw him right afterward. He also doesn't tell Lestat that he's with Armand, so put a pin in that because that'll be significant later. He finds Lestat living in squalor. Lestat is basically just miserable and depressed. He's got this other vampire who's like fetching him food. He doesn't want to leave the house. Everything's disgusting. They keep talking about how many bugs are in the house, which, like, you can imagine in New Orleans is like real nasty, based on the climate. It's kind of tropical, if you know what I mean. And this other vampire like brings Lestat a baby to eat, and Lestat's just like, I can't, what do you, like, why did you bring me this? And he's like whining and crying, and like the way he's described is very, very pitiful. Louis just kind of takes the baby and like hushes it, and then later he like takes it away again. So the baby's fine, don't worry. But they kind of reconcile, and then Louis just leaves. And then it's like a little bit of time goes by, and then Louis and Armand are kind of hanging out on the levee, you know. And he kind of casually mentions like, oh yeah, I went and saw Lestat. And then it says that Armand is like, I'm amazed you haven't mentioned this before. I just like, I don't know, like what, yeah, I'd be amazed too. Like I would be amazed too. And so then they kind of have this like breakup conversation, where Armand is like, did he tell you anything about Paris? And Louis like, oh, I know that you killed Claudia. Like, I've known all along. I'm not stupid. I know it was you. And Armand's like, but you know, through this conversation, what they realize is that Armand is really sick of Louis because he's like, I was ready to really start living, and you are just a drip, you know, like you're dead inside. And Louis like, well, I'm dead inside because of things that you did. So congratulations, this is what you get. So they just kind of break up, and then Louis moves to San Francisco. So like back in the present day, the reporter, the boy, is like, that's it? Like you told me all this story about these great passionate loves of your lives, and how, you know, you went through all of this stuff, and then that's it, and you're just ending your story with like, here I am in San Francisco. This is so dumb. And he's like, what? How could you just let it end like this? And then he says, like, you should turn me into a vampire because we're gonna have so much fun together. You don't even know like the gift that you have with immortality. I would appreciate it, and I would show you how to really use it to your advantage. So Louis is like, I'm so mad at you. Like, you did not hear a single word I said. So he bites him. He like attacks him, and then he leaves. So he doesn't kill him. The reporter wakes up the next day, and he's like, that was weird. I'm gonna go look for Lestat. And that's the end of the book. Okay, so that was like a 20-minute synopsis. I'm telling you, just doing a plot summary is not enough, but it also, I'm cognizant that it took a long time. And yet I have like several more pages of notes because there's a lot I want to talk about in here. A lot of stuff happened, a lot of interesting stuff. There's so much going on in this story that I feel like just giving you a plot summary is inadequate. Okay, so as promised, I'm gonna just first go into like all the times that this book was super homoerotic. And I think it's one thing that I will start with is that there is no, you know, they are not Shane and Ilya from Heated Rivalry, okay? This book was written in the 70s. Queer literature at that time was not as explicit as it maybe is today. Generally speaking, I don't think romance literature was as explicit back then. Gothic romance was not as explicit. So there is a little bit of requiring the audience to read between the lines that is just part of what it was. And if you were to read all of the Vampire Chronicles books in order, you will see that the sex becomes more explicit as the series progresses because times change. And so by the time, you know, you're writing a book in the 1990s, it's a very different world than in the 1970s. But that said, I don't see how you could miss it. The gayness is just like exploding off the page, okay? So from the top, Louis keeps insisting to the reporter that he's normal, that there's nothing unusual about him, that he's just a normal guy, normal. But he describes Lestat as being seductive and beautiful, and that it's like being in love, and that he just had to stay with him. He says that drinking blood for a vampire is impossible to describe to a human because he says, how could you explain the feeling of making love to someone who's never done it? So from the jump, drinking blood, the exchange of blood between vampires or vampire and human, it's like having sex. It's basically like an orgasm, right? So, and there's many scenes in which, you know, someone is drinking someone's blood and they're having a sexual experience, obviously. When Lestat first turns Louis into a vampire, he's like, oops, I forgot to get you a coffin, so you're gonna have to lay on top of me in my coffin. And he really says that. And Louis is like, can I just be in this closet instead? Okay, like, what? You know, pretty obvious. During the scenes where it flashes back or flashes forward, I guess, to the 1970s, there's a couple times when Daniel, the reporter, Daniel Malloy, he gets flustered because Louis says something about his attraction to somebody, or, you know, he tells Louis that he's beautiful. So it's like, obviously this reporter is kind of having a crush on this vampire, and then he feels weird about it. So he says it, and then he says it like 5 pages later, just in case he was like, I don't know if you understood my meaning, but like, I think you're really hot. There's also this young man that Lestat is seeing during their time in New Orleans. So Louis is incredibly jealous. He usually doesn't describe characters in this way, so it really stands out the way he describes this young man. It says when Louis first sees this young man, he's talking about his body heat, his pink cheeks, his smart attire, his smell of cologne and salt, his long brown hair, his sweat, and I quote, his young, taut body. Okay, this is not how Louis describes anybody else, right? He's not normally looking at people and giving you that much information about the way that they look and smell and dress and all of that, right? He's just really jealous. And he knows that Lestat likes to, you know, play with his food, so to speak. But he says, it had gone on longer than any other such friendship I had ever observed. And then 1 page later, he repeats to the reporter, as I said, it had gone on far longer than any other such friendship Lestat had ever had. So he's incredibly jealous. Lestat even kind of teases him about it by, you know, saying sort of like, did I or didn't I kill him? And then he kind of says, well, aren't you in love with Babette? Like, isn't she your lady love? So you get the feeling that Lestat is kind of jealous of Louis being obsessed with Babette, and Louis is jealous of Lestat being obsessed with and seeing this young man. So these guys, I mean, it's just crazy. Another thing that is really, really gay is Armand has a young man that he's keeping as like a combination food source. I mean, Capri Sun, I don't know. and also a lover, and he keeps him in a cage, as you do, right? And when they first meet, when Louis and Armand first meet at the theater, and then Armand's showing him, like, this is where we live, he offers him this guy whose name is Dennis, right? So it's funny, this guy actually has a name, even though he's not like that important of a character. Louis is drinking his blood, and Louis really wants the audience, which is the reporter, to know that the entire time Dennis has a raging boner. I mean, it's really, really obvious. In general, Louis is just really a lot less subtle about Armand than he was about Lestat. So here's, like, you know, within that list, this is a sub-list. These are all the gay thoughts that Louis has about Armand. So he describes him as graceful, remote, dreamy, and weirdly soothing. He, you know, accepts his offer of drinking from his love slave. And he says that Dennis really reminds him of the naked lady on the stage in the theater who had a very erotic death. Okay. He, like I said, he mentions Dennis's boner more than once. And other than thinking that the whole Dennis thing is kind of weird, Louis is, like, really admiring Armand's personal space, like his bedroom, his chambers, whatever. And he's basically ready to rent the U-Haul. He's like, I could really see myself living here. He compares the simple comfort of Armand's home to the excess and grandiosity of how Lestat and Claudia live, which he's been complaining about, like, throughout the whole book, is they spend too much money, they buy nice things and they don't appreciate them. And then he looks at, you know, where Armand is living, and it's, like, fairly simple, comfortable, and he's like, I can dig it, right? There are two female vampires, Celeste and Estelle, who are kind of hugging and holding and touching Armand, and Louis is incredibly jealous, and he just, like, straight up says, like, I'm really jealous of them. There's a scene where the theater vampires are like, tell us the story, Armand, and Armand's like, all right, I'm going to tell you a story of the olden days, kids, back when I was in a cult. But the whole time he's telling the story, he's, like, kind of just, like, checked out, and he and Louis are just, like, very clearly eye fucking, like, intensely. Girl, I can't notice but to notice you noticing me. Louis says his heart expands as soon as he sees Armand. And Claudia immediately clocks that Louis would leave her for Armand in a heartbeat. She calls him on it. She says, Armand loves you, and he wants me out of the picture because he wants you. And Louis' response is like, yay, he likes me. It's like not hearing her at all. It's kind of sad. Armand takes Louis to his secret lair, which is outside of the theater. None of the other vampires know that he has this second home. And Louis is like, wow, this is also kind of a nice place. While they're there, he's telling himself, like, wow, Armand's such a good listener. And he excites me in other ways, which resemble fear, which is weird. And then he also tells Armand, oh, me and Lestat were, like, not romantic. Not at all. Which I think we all know is a lie, right? Like, it's just, yeah, he just doesn't want Armand to know. Armand is equally unsettled about liking Louis. He's the unchallenged king of the gaslighters, okay? And so when they first meet, he does this thing where he moves at super fast vampire speed and just, like, holds Louis in his arms and then, like, goes back to where he was and then acts like nothing happened, which is a very odd thing to do. I don't even know. Like I said, he's basically sedating Claudia, telling her to kill herself, telling her, I want you gone. I am not ready to be a stepdad. You need to get out of here. He says these words to Louis, which I challenge you, who would say this in a non-romantic way. He says, I want you. I want you more than anything in the world. A little of the BDSM of it all that is, like, kind of surrounds Armand as a character is that there's a scene where he's, like, feeding Dennis. He's like, gotta, you know, fatten you up so I can drink from you later. And Dennis calls him his master, and Armand says, no, I'm your slave, right? So he's just, like, I don't know. And it's extra funny because he like totally kills Dennis later. So what is he, Spartacus? Louis also openly admits that he made Madeline into a vampire just to get free of Claudia so he can be with Armand. So I think that's like pretty obvious. When Louis and Armand decide to travel together, the first place they go is North Africa, which in that time period was like a haven for gay men. That's where gay men traveled together. There's a lot of, you know, media, books, stories, etc., like Oscar Wilde stories and Brideshead Revisited, where, you know, guys go to North Africa, and we all know what that means. When Louis, like at the beginning of part 4, he's saying the story's over to the reporter, but then he says multiple times like, well, I know you want to know what happened to Armand. So you gotta wonder, is he like reading his thoughts? Is the reporter wondering if Louis is single? Like, what is going on there? And then he confesses that during the trial that Lestat had, this is a quote, Lestat had aroused in me feelings which I hadn't wished to confide in anyone. So that's my list of the moments that stood out to me. I think that should end any such discussion forever that this book is not gay. It's so gay. All right, now I want to talk about the times that it was just like weird, because one of the things that Anne Rice does really well to create this sense of distance between the reader and the characters as monsters is by having them do things that are so far outside the norm of human behavior that you can't help but be horrified. So one of the things that's really off-putting is the way that Louis talks about Claudia. When he first sees her, he talks about wanting her the way he wants men. And we know that the act of drinking blood is a sexual act for them. So he has gone to all these lengths to convince Lestat himself, the reporter, that he was not into Babette. He does not like her the way that he likes other people, I guess, or he does not like her in a romantic way. But he says he does like Claudia in kind of a romantic way. And then this is a quote. He says, I was barely aware of what it meant. I was aware and aghast. So he kind of horrifies himself with it a little, which is like, okay. He compares her eyes to Babette's eyes, and then later he says her eyes are a woman's eyes, which, no, they're not. They're a 5-year-old girl's eyes. He describes her as sensual multiple times. He describes her as a seductress and as womanish. He dresses her like a doll. He says we are father and daughter, lover and lover. And it's unclear if she ever stopped sleeping in his coffin with him. So she does get her own little coffin, but she just keeps sleeping in his coffin with him. There's another scene where, you know, when Claudia wants to kill Lestat, she gets these 7-year-old twin boys and poisons them and is like, I brought you a snack, or I brought you a treat. You know, I'm trying to get along with you. And Lestat is like licking this kid's naked chest and being really gross and like orgasming while he's like eating him. It's real nasty. And then I think another thing that was weird and very Anne Rice, very Vampire Chronicles, is just like the religiosity that kind of overshadows everything. So Armand and the Coven live under the theater, and they have these like massive paintings of like heaven and hell and angels and demons. And, you know, this is kind of a nod to Armand's past story, which we'll get more of later, but he was the leader of a cult called the Children of Darkness. And one of Louis's first questions to him is, are we the children of Satan? Which is kind of another hint. So there's like a lot of stuff, and, you know, Louis has kind of a lot of moments where he talks about his own faith and his struggle with it and how outside of it he feels. So that's weird in a not unsavory way, but there is like this awareness that they have that they are not that they don't know where they fit in, right, in this sort of cosmic order of the universe, right? Okay, so now for more lighthearted, I want to talk about like the scenes I thought were the funniest. Okay, so remember back when Lestat's blind father was living with them? So Louis and Lestat would sit down to dinner with empty plates and forks and knives and just kind of like make noises on the plate so that he thought they were eating dinner. And I like to visualize that. That is funny to me. When they haven't named the reporter at all, and they don't name him, like I said, he doesn't even get a name until 2 books later in The Queen of the Damned. However, his name is Daniel, but there is a Daniel in this book, and that is the guy that they used to replace the overseer that they murdered. So in the beginning, when Lestat turns Louis into a vampire, he's like, part of the process of becoming a vampire is you got to witness a murder, which is not true. Like, he just made that up. But they decide to murder the overseer of Louis's plantation. And then they replace him with an enslaved man named Daniel, which I don't know. It's funny to me that there's a Daniel, even though there's this other Daniel who isn't called Daniel. When Lestat finds Louis drinking Claudia's blood, he picks up her dead mother and dances with her corpse. Charming. At one point, Lestat brings these 2 prostitutes home and he's draining them one at a time, and one of them is dead and her friend thinks she's passed out and she's drunk and she's just sitting there like, she's so stupid, blah blah blah. The first time that Claudia and Louis murder Lestat, he shrivels up like the crypt keeper. He's like, I don't know, I just picture like a sponge drying out, and it's really funny. When Santiago first sees Louis in Paris, he just goes up to him and starts like copying everything he does, like they're 5. I don't know. It's really stupid. And then later he shoves Louis and then Armand slaps him, which is just, I don't know. I really enjoy like just imagining this, right? Like they're just fighting like children because they're stupid. Okay, so I talked a bit about like Louis like checking out Armand's like digs and being like, I could really see myself living here. This is what he has in his house. He has a bed and a cage for his human sex slave. He has a fireplace, a desk, a coffin, a wall of books, a human skull, a painting of Satan, and 2 little armchairs by the fire. So isn't that just cozy? There's also a moment that I think was just really funny where Louis being really intense and serious, and he's like, you know, tell me what this means, because Armand has that painting of Satan. And Armand's just like, it's a painting. Okay, it's a painting, right? Like, I think the secret hideaway that Armand has is also very funny. It's kind of the first hint that this guy is not only like duplicitous, but also like deeply silly, which comes to the forefront in later books. I'll just give you that little spoiler. He's extremely silly. He's climbing up the side of this house and he's like, oh yeah, I live in these people's attic. Louis is like, aren't you worried they're gonna see you? And Armand's like, no, they think I'm a ghost. They know I'm here, but they think I'm a ghost. What's the big deal? Another really, really funny scene that I just can't get this visual out of my head is that Madeline decides she's not gonna make dolls anymore when she becomes a vampire, but what she is gonna do is make tiny furniture for Claudia at vampire speed. So there's like this intense woodworking scene going on where she's just like making making Claudia a little chair and a little table and everything. I don't know, like I would like to see that, you know. I kind of wish that had made it into the TV show. Another thing that was funny to me is that after Louis tells Armand, don't go back to the theater, if you know what I mean, Armand moves his furniture out, which, like, wouldn't people notice that? Doesn't that look suspicious? Like, oh, you're just moving your furniture out for no reason, but nobody notices. Louis decapitates Santiago with the prop scythe that he used in the theater. And Santiago's hands reach up and grope around for the head that is no longer there. Meanwhile, Louis kicks his head down a hallway. I love it so much. And then finally in the scene right before Louis and Armand break up, they're like laying on this beach. They're just hanging out. And Louis is thinking, I really wish that you weren't here. It's just, to me, that's just incredible. Okay, so now I want to talk about all the times that Louis was a real dick, because I think that it's easy to read it as he's this depressed guy and he's really not that bad, but like, he's a real dick, okay? He's kind of a jerk. They're all horrible, right? That's the point. So Louis really like laughs in his brother's face, like way at the beginning of the book when his brother says, I want to start a gospel revival. He just like laughs in his face. And then his brother kills himself. And then people say, Louis, did you make your brother kill yourself? And he laughs in their face. Louis beats up a priest for no particular reason. He just beats up a priest. He's mad. He's upset. He's not coping well with the death of his brother, so he beats up a priest. When he's first becoming a vampire, like I said, Lestat is like, we have to kill somebody, so let's kill the overseer of your plantation. And Louis describes like the great fun he's having in like beating this man to death, which, I mean, okay. Louis talks a lot about how much respect he has for human life. He doesn't want to take human life, but like, he's enslaving people. I don't think we should forget that. I don't think we should forget the fact that he thinks it's totally fine to enslave people. He is extremely controlling when it comes to money. So he says that, you know, he's sort of surprised to find out that Lestat is from a similar social class than him and that Lestat has money. In the beginning, he doesn't seem like he himself has that much money, but he's doing okay, but he's trying to hold it together. So you can assume that a lot of the money that he does have access to was originally Lestat's, but he is the one that holds the purse strings. And when he's thinking of leaving Lestat, he's like, okay, maybe like I'll give you your own little business to run, or I'll like sign one thing over into your name. But he's very clear that he keeps everything in his own name and that he uses that as a way to be controlling of both Lestat and then later of Claudia. He blames Armand for his own like misery, I guess, even though he's like, the thing I hate most about you is that I hate myself. And then he lets Armand keep trying to make the relationship happen for like decades, which I think is kind of shitty, because that's just him being like passive and not taking action in his life again. So he's like, the thing I hate about you is the thing I hate about me, so I'm gonna do that to you. I don't know. I just think you're being shitty to Armand and you're being shitty to yourself, man. You're not going to find happiness this way. He also lies to Armand about seeing Lestat. He's very, you know, cagey about it. And then he only brings it up to like instigate a breakup, which, I mean, fair. Like, maybe he should have. And I think like probably his worst crime is just that he always chooses his lovers over Claudia. He says he wants her so much. He calls her his lover. He is so obsessed with her, except for when there's someone better around to be obsessed with. So he treats her really poorly. And then he's like mad that she's dead. He's mad at everyone else that she's dead when he didn't even really like her that much to begin with, it seems like. So I don't know. Louis is kind of a jerk, but I think in this read through, I would say he's a very compelling jerk. Okay, now I'm going to wrap this up by just giving you a couple more things that I found really interesting. And I'm just calling these like rabbit holes that I think are worth going down. So the first rabbit hole was about sugar production in Louisiana. And I started reading all about sugar production and got like really distracted when I was doing my second read through of this book and taking notes, because one of the things that stood out as when Louis is comparing himself to Frenier and saying how he's like, he's this and he's that, and I, basically, I'm not, he talks about how Frenier is going to go into sugar production, which in the 1790s would have been a really cutting edge thing to be doing. So now sugar is like one of Louisiana's main products. I think, you know, it didn't really get going until like the early 1800s, but somebody who was investing in running a sugar plantation in the 1790s would have been like ahead of the curve. And this plantation, where the area they're describing is along this river road in, I want to say, St. John the Baptist Parish, just outside of New Orleans. I've been there. There's a plantation called the Whitney Plantation, which is a museum dedicated to the understanding the lives of children who were enslaved and what it was like for children. It's a really beautiful place. But one of the things they have there is they have these massive kettles that were used for making sugar. And they show you just how awful and difficult it would have been to make sugar at that time, because and when I say kettle, I mean, imagine a giant iron bowl that's about 5 feet across. And so what you would do is you would take your sugar cane and I think crush it or something and then boil it. As it boils, the juice separates from the crystals, and then you pour it into the next kettle and boil it, and then you pour it into the next kettle and boil it. So these kettles would have taken several people to lift. They would have been unbelievably hot. I literally don't even know how people did this work, but they did it because they had no choice. And I got a photo of these kettles when I was there, so I thought that was like very cool to just share. There's also a TV show called Queen Sugar that is like set in modern times, and it's about like a small sugar farmer in Louisiana, and it's really fascinating about it does dive into like the history of sugar production in Louisiana and how, you know, small farmers, especially Black farmers, struggle to maintain their family farms, and you know, it's not easy to farm these days, and it's certainly not easy when you live in a very racist society that doesn't want to see you succeed. Another thing that was really interesting in this book was how the slave rebellion against Louis and Lestat was led by Daniel, who was their new overseer who was enslaved. And in 1811, there was the largest slave rebellion in United States history, or the largest slave insurrection. It's called the German Coast Uprising. It happened in exactly the place where the Pointe du Lac and Frenier plantations would be today, which is along that river road where the Whitney plantation is. And that rebellion was led by a man named Charles DeLand, who was an enslaved overseer. So this is one of the examples of how Anne uses real life historical events and changes them slightly to make events in her books that happen to her characters. So this is like a big thing. I remember in the book, The Vampire Armand, there's tons of stuff in there that reflects real life events of the time. But it's just such a neat trick that she does, where she's sort of mirroring real life events and then putting it in the context of this story. It just gives you such a flavor of like that time period and what it was like.
Hi, so this is Rhiannon from the future, or editing Rhiannon. I kept having technical difficulties while I was recording this, so I apologize that it is ending with me actually just showing you a photo of the house that Anne Rice lived in 2018 when I visited. I wanted to say, if you get a chance to visit New Orleans, definitely go to the Garden District. That's where she owned a bunch of different homes. That's where a lot of her characters live. It's very much a part of the books, and you know, there's just so much cool history there. Like, New Orleans is such a great city to visit, and the architecture is stunning. And I appreciate you sticking around, especially since I did have some challenges with this video. Please comment and let me know what you think, and I would love to hear from you. And if you want these book reviews to be shorter, if you enjoy a really long deep dive, and I hope you stay tuned for Gideon the Ninth, which will be my next book review.